record now. Great. So Carrie, did you want to say a few more things, or should we pass on to the first activity? We've got a Mentimeter activity to sort of test your knowledge about the pre-reading and pre-knowledge. It's just a little shared activity.
Yeah, I guess it's just for me to recap about the learning objectives. So we know there's so much experience here on this session today, but there's also some newer folk. There's people that have got a lot of extensive experience already outside of the Red Cross. So it's just a chance for us to talk about our response and our approach. And we've been doing this work for a really long time, but without a manual. And hopefully this session will bring to life the manual, help us to remind our staff and volunteer teams about the limits of that role, and how to pull on and share these cases with different departments, safeguarding, and also with each other, as we learn, who's got tricks up their sleeves, and to start looking at the tool so it becomes a useful resource. Yeah, so this is just really a start to explore that manual. And thank you to those in the session that have already read sections of it for Virginia and I and fed back along that journey to get it to where it is. So thank you.
Yeah, same to you. That's right. Thank you. And yeah, we hope this is a resource to share, to support the caseworker to recognize, respond to disclosure in the safest way, and because this aims to be practical and a challenging session around the key elements, safety. Yeah, as I said before, please participate. I see that the group is a fantastic group with lots of experience. So without further ado, I will move to the first activity. Got the slide. So if you don't mind putting in your browser www.menti.com, and you'll be asked to put your name. You can use a nickname, and insert this code that is on the screen right now. I'll read it to you. 1096713. It's a little quiz. 1096713, and I'll bring it up just now. Oopsie, I've got too many screens open. Okay, so I'll wait a couple of minutes to give you, a minute to wait to give you time to insert the code. Again, 1096713. First question. Okay.
Could I have the code again?
Sorry, 1096713.
Thank you.
Sorry, the first question is gone, but hopefully feedback later. Wait a minute, it doesn't seem to work.
The suspense is intriguing. No. I can't believe I'm even playing along, and I'm feeling competitive.
I'm so sorry. It is wanting to be competitive and quick, but for some reason it's only showing the first question.
We're all poised, aren't we?
I
folks?
know. Oh no, fail. It worked last time really well. I don't know what's going on. I've done the same thing. Reset the results. Sorry. All slides. Maybe that's what it was. Apologies. So sorry, got to do it again. Now you've got the answer. Let's see if it works. Answer fast to get more points, it says.
Sorry, Carrie, I've just I'm out of that Mentimeter. You just in the chat box, can you just send me the number again to access?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That's okay. It's okay.
It is 1096713.
1096713. Thank you.
Can't you get an eye? Okay. For some reason, I'm really sorry. It doesn't let me move to the next question. So why don't we just do it manually? So sorry, I'm not getting in the competition. I don't know why it's not working. I'm so sorry. So first question was rape within marriage is as serious as rape by a stranger, and everybody participated, got that right. The second is we should encourage a client to leave an abusive relationship. This is too easy like this, though. You can see the answers. Any ideas?
False. That should be. We should give them help them to make an informed decision by giving them all the information. But at the end of the day, it's their decision if they want to leave or not.
Thank you. There was one question that said, if you're an asylum seeker, the Home Office can pay for a refuge space. Yes or no?
Yes.
I think that's possible.
Yeah. A person with recourse to public funds can approach any local authority if they're fleeing a domestic abuse.
So local request.
I think that's that's correct. Because I think safety is for everyone, no matter what your situation is or what your status
recourse
is.
to public funds. Yeah. So technically, you should be.
And the answers are coming into the chat as well.
Thank you. You're making it really like a quiz. Fantastic.
That's it. Margin.
Sorry, I'm not very quick at.
Margin was very quick, swiftly followed by Nadeem with a yes. Yeah, that's right.
You. And one more question is, a refuge is the safest place for someone exiting domestic abuse? Sorry, keep on reading. Yes. Yes, that's a one question that we put there as like, it can be a yes and no. It depends on the person, and it depends on the situation. So it's just to remind that, you know, it's like an individual choice, and we should always try to, you know, to put the client at the center. And you know, for some people, refuge is like, might increase isolation, mental health, but obviously there might be no other option. So thank you for participating. I'm really sorry. I would have loved to see like the results with like the top quickest answers. So let me show. Am I still sharing the screen, Carrie? I forgot.
I think I'll take over screen sharing now.
Okay, so I'll stop share. Thank you.
Can I add something on what you've just said, Virginia?
Yes, of course.
I think though refuge could be a safe space, it also depends with the victim if they don't share information with other people on where they are and
Yeah.
information that can reach the perpetrator of where they are placed?
Yeah. No, that's a safe. Safety means a lot of things, right? And yes, yeah, you can't share your address with anybody, right? So it can also be like an element of isolation. But obviously, there's good reasons why it's the way it is, right?
Okay, can everyone see my screen there? We've swapped sharing, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the Home Office's description for domestic abuse. I'm sure that you've all seen it, but it's important just to remember that abuse can be from intimate partners, but also from family members. And as we explore in previous sessions and a little bit in today's session and touch on so-called honor-based violence, the prevalence, sadly, of abuse from siblings or even from children to adults, we should be really mindful of indicators from all sorts of perpetrators within a person's circle. Also wanted just to highlight, as I'm sure all of you know already, but the addition of the controlling and coercive abuse to be highlighted there, and to bring the the focus away from just violence. You don't have to have a bruise to be suffering abuse, and it's brilliant that now people are being actually, what's the word? Prosecuted. Thank you. For controlling and coercive behaviour too.
Sorry, Kerry, are we doing questions at the end?
You can absolutely raise a question now or put it in the chat. Yeah, go for it. Did you want to ask a question on that?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted to sit in the chat or not.
So feel free to ask.
That definition, I just noticed the age where it said 16 and over. So what happens, what happens if it's two 15-year-olds and they're in a relationship and there's abuse? Or what happens if it's a 15-year-old going out with a 16-year-old?
It's a really good point. And we I've had a session with young refugees not so long ago, and they've got like some people before they leave their country of origin, they've already been married. So I'm not sure about the definition in here, but some of this will come as child domestic abuse and like under child protection. And in some cases, in reality, we'll be speaking to safeguarding and trying to resolve some of these issues. But yeah, thanks for raising the definition.
I think I don't know the answer, but I'm thinking it relates more as well to what people, the age of prosecution and the age at which young people can be prosecuted. But certainly, I think if we've got cases, as Virginia said, we'd be navigating that very much with our child protection safeguarding teams. But I think this relates, more to the law under what sort of prosecution might be put forward. But our work with young refugees, no doubt, really does make that quite poignant. That's a really good point.
So we put in these two slides on the laws, just to, as Kerry said, just to remind that coercion and control are very part of the definition of domestic abuse. And so can stalking and harassment be part of like the exiting the relationship or during the relationship? And that domestic abuse is not only physical violence, a form of assault, and that they've been legislated relatively recently. and have their own legal definitions if you want. So on the next slide, those who attended last week's session, the first session we had Helen McCormick from the safeguarding team to talk to us about her role and the safeguarding team. And she reminded us that the vast majority of cases, about 95%, are documented properly across the country, which is great. But that leaves space for about 5% where it can have dangerous consequences for a survivor or her family. I forgot to mention that we consider during this session domestic abuse between wife, husband as a perpetrator, so husband-wife relationship. But of course, domestic abuse can mean have lots of other aspects, from children to being having another family member being the perpetrator, or validating the abuse by the husband. We find situations of even children being potential abusers because they know more English. So there's a variety, but for purposes of this training, we consider husband-wife. So back to what Helen was saying, is that it's to remind that, of course, you're doing some, from what you said at the beginning, when you were introducing yourself, some of you are doing some very complex work on domestic abuse, but we do not offer specialist services at the Red Cross. So that leaves and highlights the importance of safeguarding and the importance to report properly, because a lack of it leaves us vulnerable, obviously for having consequences for the client potentially, but also leaves us vulnerable as staff, because the safeguarding team can really provide an oversight, advise properly, and give an organizational support that can take some of that burden away, especially when we're working remotely. And we'll talk about a little bit about that. And that's a burden away, beyond the psychosocial support we have access to. We consider it's important to remember that domestic abuse is cases are high-risk cases, and so it's important to share decisions. The safeguarding team might be asked to provide documentation in cases, criminal law cases, and they take it from what is submitted on Datex. So remember to document, and sometimes it's important to use verbatim when it's appropriate about disclosures. There are safeguarding e-modules coming up in 2021. SWIM contributed to the core safeguarding module, and that's going to come pretty soon, early next year, and it's quite advanced, even though it's aimed for the whole of the Red Cross. And also in 2021, they aim to produce a more advanced version for just RS-RFL. So watch that space. So now it's a good time to move on to the next session. We'll have a breakout room discussion for about, say, 15 minutes. We'll have 2 breakout rooms, and we'll have time for feedback. We'll have a chance to read the scenario properly in the breakout room. But I will just very quickly put you in breakout rooms. I'll stop.
Can I ask you a question before you go?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Just quickly, it's kind of like when we, from the definitions or our we have a certain dogma that the perpetrator is kind of follows man, but it's not necessarily, it could be reversed actually, but we don't know. And then in past we have came across 1 or 2 cases where man is the receiving end, and we are struggling to find actually proper support for them. We're contacting a lot of charities and different peoples, even local authorities. It is find a bit challenging for them to understand this perspective. So I think that's we need to address in some point. I don't know what SWIM has got that purview, because it's dedicatedly for the women, but then
Yeah.
I think we can raise this issue at some point.
Thank you so much for raising that. Absolutely, and yeah, it can be the reverse, and and they find themselves in a system that assumes the opposite in some way, even though, you know, the thing is, the reason why we're always focusing on this is it helps to sort of narrow down and really focus, because these sessions are so short. We had to take that decision, and also the responses are different. As you said, referrals can be challenging, but there are some organizations that support men both in violent masculinities and or as victims, and yeah, even legal support. So I'll try to put together some resources to share. And yes, and as I said before, even for RSRFL clients, sometimes you've got the family that also perpetuates or validates the violence, either in the country of origin or here in the UK with extended family. And so it's, yeah, it's a narrow view, but it helps because responses are very specific. But thanks for the question. It's, yeah, totally agree on that. I'll pause.
Really messy notes, so I might have forgotten some things. So please shout if I don't mention one of the points that was made. So we said the first thing we would do is try to figure out how safe she is at that very moment, because she was whispering. So we try and ask yes and no questions first, like, are you safe? Can you speak? Is the perpetrator near you? Things like that, to try and figure out how much we can actually discuss with her at that time. And then just in case we lose communication in that point, or that it's not safe to speak, trying to find an alternative time to communicate, whether, you know, she might be time she goes for a walk, or a time he's not there. And if we can reach her on this, if we can just call her, or if we need to text first, or what's the best way of us being able to communicate with her. We would focus on thanking her for the disclosure, because there was a mention that no other professionals are involved or know about this, and trying to build that rapport with her, asking her what she wants to happen, and, you know, really making her aware that we really respect, like, we really respect the trust that she's placed in us, and try not to promise anything, to manage the expectations of what we can do. Because there's a child involved, we would try to ask questions about where the child is the child in immediate danger, try to speak to her about protecting herself, but also protecting her baby, and because there's a child involved, what we need to do as professionals, and about us sharing this disclosure with the statutory agencies, to make sure that the children and her are safeguarded. What else? Practical things, like if she has to leave the situation immediately, if she has to flee, does she have our number? And maybe if she's calling us on a mobile or something, she can have the office number, make sure she has all those kind of essential things, phone charger, if she has some cash, if she has a friend's house she can go to where she can be safe. Yeah, I don't know, I think that's it. Yeah, I probably forgot stuff, but that's what we had.
Thank you. Anybody from our group want to add, maybe Margin, what we've spoken about?
Okay, so I think we've come up with similar points to the other group. You know, I think it's also important when we're dealing with DV incidents, if we ask direct questions. We can't be, you know, shy or reserved when asking our questions, because the more direct we are, and she can give like a yes to that or a no to that, because if we're vague, we won't really get the level of risk, so to say. So just to be very direct with our questions. In our group, people did bring up that if the husband was a client, that someone said they would check in on him, not disclosing that the partner had mentioned any DV, just to check in to see where his head at and his mental and well-being state. We'd also ask questions around if she felt she could leave the house safely, or if she could pack things safely which wouldn't raise any suspicion to the husband. Thanking her for the disclosure, reminding her about what to do between calls if something did happen, like telling her, advising her to call 999 if she felt her and the baby were at risk. Talk about our safeguarding, because it's a safeguarding concern, we'd have to do the internal and external safeguardings, and ask her if she would like a referral to a domestic violence charity, just things like that there.
Thank you, Margin. Yes, thank you, everyone. Does anybody want to add anything like around this?
I think one of the things I was just thinking about, just having seen the thing again, was that she's reliant on her husband's asylum claim, so she might be really, really worried about that. So it might be like when we're able to have this conversation, obviously if she's not in immediate danger, to kind of somehow allay kind of those fears, because if she's really worried about obviously the kind of abuse that she's experiencing, but also the fact that she's dependent on his claim, something around that, I mean, I don't know exactly what that would be, but like kind of prioritizing the issues in a way that if she's in immediate danger, that's what we need to focus on, whereas the kind of asylum stuff can come a little bit after that, if that makes sense. Because what we've talked about is kind of the more immediate stuff, which obviously is really important, but then if she's just really focused and really worried as well about the fact that she may have to leave the country because of, like, if she like leaves her husband or whatever, just kind of a bit of reassurance and a bit of kind of talk about that as well.
Yeah,
no,
probably. Yeah,
Oh,
go
sorry,
ahead, Kerry.
Virginia.
No, you go.
Well, I was just going to say, if it wasn't properly understood, her status is key to helping her navigate the next steps, isn't it? And legal advice and reassurance from a legal advisor about exactly her rights might make her decision easier in terms of what she's going to do in those next steps, but also for us as trying to enable her to make decisions around what she wants to happen. She may need us to help her clarify that the support options are there, that the Home Office absolutely doesn't need to corroborate any proof, that they would first respond with a "we believe you, we need to get you out" sort of situation. So that status is definitely important to us and to her options at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the first questions probably you will ask to understand the situation better and be able to advise on her options for accommodation. So just in terms of our feedback, I mean, I'm not going to add anything that you already mentioned, but just really highlight that, yes, it would be useful to get things in place. I know there is an element of urgency and understanding the situation, and, you know, also it's during a phone call, so there might be limits in practice on how much information you can get. But in terms of risk assessment, you know, we do need to make a bit of a basic risk assessment there and then, to understand if the abusing has been increasing over time. Somebody mentioned that. Of course, if it's an imminent threat, and you know, so that we can get enough information to report to safeguarding at the earliest opportunity. But also to remember, like from my perspective, is to, you know, to try to keep that person-centered approach, to understand what does the client want to do today, to reiterate, like, and really understand she wants to move today. Understand a little bit more of the context. Have she tried to leave before? When did it start? I mean, we know that she was a client of the Red Cross already, but there might be previous instances that she hadn't disclosed. Double check again, does anybody else know? Yes, remind to call 999 in an emergency, and really focus on validating and really remember that risk is individual. So to really understand from her perspective about the urgency, and we'll probably echo that in our response. Did you want to add anything else, Carrie? Maybe about barriers, like the fact that we're working remotely all the time. Somebody raised it in the breakout.
Well, I mean, I was just impressed really with the group's sort of considerations, and I think although it is really, really challenging working remotely, the same sort of thought and care was there about responding to that. In the first few comments, it was really to get an understanding of imminent danger, but actually about taking time and care to build that rapport, just using our voices, which is more challenging, isn't it, than being face to face. But the importance of that, in the working relationship between you and the client, and the importance of building that trust, and that trust has to be built by being genuine and being open, being frank, like Marjan said, in terms of being quite specific, so we can do that managing of risk, but not promising, and really managing expectations, but taking her lead. And it could be his or her lead, but in this case study, it was a woman. And really, I was just so delighted to hear, the focus on what is it that she really wants, because I think that's one of the most challenging things I've found doing casework, is when you're working with someone who's surviving it daily and they don't want to leave, and then also that the difficulty in navigating things when someone does want to leave and their options are very, very limited. I hate the fact that we have to ask someone's immigration status in the first few questions. We shouldn't have to ask that, it shouldn't matter, but actually in terms of problem solving and routes out, it does. And we'll go on to look a little bit at leave options in the next few slides. But I'm sort of blown away really by the fact that we aren't specialists in domestic abuse, but I'm hearing literally all the things that are in the manual.
Yes.
It's pretty amazing, just that natural responsiveness. So yeah.
Thank you. Yes, that leads me to sort of introduce the next slide about the 6 stages of domestic abuse. As you were saying, Carrie, there's a little bit like a cycle where, very briefly, I'm going to mention, this is like a little bit of theory around domestic abuse. Liz Kelly is a lady who developed the 6 stages. Sometimes it's 8 stages, but in any case, it's a little bit of context to remember that not everyone wants to leave when you speak to them. That, especially for RSRFL clients, you might find that they are more vulnerable to other forms of exploitation after they exit. And speaking to the anti-trafficking team, they sometimes work with clients who exited a domestic abuse situation and ended up couch surfing and other forms of trafficking of some sort and exploitation. Also to remember that the highest risk of domestic homicide is when someone decides to leave. So it's really, really important to remember that, yeah, we're not specialists, and we aim to get that specialism through referrals and at the earliest opportunity, but also to try to find some safety tips. Yes, so this this cycle of domestic abuse is to remember that it's likely that people will return, and we're working with some element of risk. But I won't have too much time to go into this right now, but you will see that there are various stages from trying to manage a situation to also almost distorting the reality, like the victim, the survivor taking burden of, you know, it's my fault, saying it's my fault, up to a point where they define abuse. But then you might find that they go back to square one, and often it's various cycles before they break the relationship, and then that they can say the abuse has ended. So
sorry, can I ask a quick question now?
Mm-hmm.
It's around managing expectations. It's like you said, we have to respond, and the more knowledge we have, the better we will respond there and then. But how should we leave it with the clients when it comes to further contact about domestic abuse situations? Should we really encourage them to go to specialist services? And I'm just not quite clear how to leave the conversation, because
so that conversation,
we want them to be able to come back to us if they want more information, but at the same time we don't want them to come back to us, because if they want to plan moving out from the household, they should really rely on specialists.
Yeah, I mean, there's no right answer like that will fit the whole of the Red Cross and its reality. So some of you work in areas that have like good links and relationships with domestic abuse specialists, and some places don't have responsive services, from what I hear. So it will depend. You always want to keep an open door, I guess, that if she wants to not make a decision right now, and, you know, having worked with vulnerable people in the past, not necessarily on domestic abuse, just in general, you sometimes give options and they say, but like always ask the question, do you want me to make a referral? And look into referrals. But, you know, bearing in mind that it might not be safe for people to get a phone call. So it's really asking that question, I would say. Anybody else wants to respond? Had anything to that?
Maybe just to add that working remotely at times, it may be difficult to pick up the domestic abuse, because we're not able to see the person we're talking to. Whereas if it's face to face, a person could be telling you something, verbally telling you something, but body language could show you that there is concern. You're bound to have concern on what is going on, and thereby maybe once you realize that there is an element of concern, you just show an acknowledgement to say, yeah, we are here to help, and should you want to talk to us, here's our number. If you want to speak to us at some point, because at times they may not decide to leave on the first meeting that you see them, and maybe even if you make that interview, they may not disclose on that interview, but still you have those concerns. So giving them your number can lead them to say, when things get maybe even tougher, they can then contact you. So give them your personal your number, maybe as your work number as a caseworker. Give them maybe even 999, so that they know they can go there, or if the offices are open, it's just you're free to come back should you want to talk to us. So that gives the person confidence to say, oh, okay, I could go back and speak to Red Cross.
Thank you, Primrose. That takes us to the next element that we wanted to raise, is that there are some higher risk indicators about the risk. And we thought, Carrie and I thought, that actually working remotely does have an added risk, in the sense that you don't see the person, you're not able to capture visual cues. Of course, if we think of that scenario we know that client from having worked with her before, so probably you can pick up some signs that about indicators, but that came as a direct disclosure. It might be a bit more difficult to capture what is like when you have like a sense that something is not right, but you don't necessarily have a disclosure. That is probably the most difficult situation, and something that is really difficult to handle and to let go of as a caseworker. But yes, so from the point of view of the caseworker, we need to assess whether the person is at immediate risk and put things in place to so understand what is the risk. So you want to have more questions around, and direct questions, somebody pointed out, as you pointed out, you want to know what type of coercion, you know, is there violence against the child, any children? You want to know, I put stalking harassment there because you want to know if she's constantly on the phone when she's out and about, you know, is she able to track emails, the frequency and severity of abuse. You want to know a little bit of that, you know, if this is escalating, because that's another added risk. Have they tried to leave the relationship before? That tells you a bit more of its ongoing nature. We know that pregnancy is a higher risk. So when women are pregnant or recently given birth, domestic abuse can increase. We've put checking if she's got access to her own money. Of course, we know that they're asylum seeking couples, so you know that will be limited. In the context of destitution and an RPF is difficult, but that's also a way of like control. Yeah, isolation is, you know, does she have a support network? Again, for asylum seeking women, that's really limited. We know some of you have had training about the DASH, which is a risk assessment tool that standardizes the way to assess risk. That's for social services usually. And it's used both for like, it's evidence-based, and it's a tool that is used for a review of homicide cases to give ideas about what level of abuse has been going on. And it's also like used in the MARAC, which is the multi-agency risk assessment conference for the high-risk cases of domestic abuse. And yeah, so there are some indicators that show greater risk, but really it's important to really take a step back and be like reflective, I think, because not all of you will have a role in the Red Cross that is specialized on working just with this. It might be, you know, a case that you have to handle together with other different types of cases. So it's really important to, as a team, have a reflective approach, take opportunities to talk about it as a team, and yeah, never be afraid to work with safeguarding to ask questions and colleagues. We're not like the anti-trafficking team. Domestic abuse doesn't have its own specialized advisor team. So yeah, be responsive and be reflective, reactive and reactive in the sense that things can quickly change, and also always keep the safeguarding team in the loop because of that. Kerry, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, just I guess we're in the Thames Valley. We're probably one of the areas that does have specialist domestic abuse services all around us, but they're not always very responsive to people from abroad. I think because of capacity and resources and the pandemic, I think we're seeing, you know, across all of our helplines and phone calls that there is sadly a massive spike in domestic abuse. It's exacerbated, isn't it, by the pandemic, because it's had such a profound effect on our service users. So there are times that we aren't getting a response to the cases we're trying to refer. And I suppose it goes back to Linda's point about, you know, we have to go case by case. but ideally you're going to be wanting to build up a person's confidence to access that specialist service, maybe let them know about the different options, you know, that we could pass on the phone number, or they could call this certain number when it's a convenient time and get specialist advice and support. But there are times we've done the DASH training, and there are times, sadly, that we've had to do the DASH in conjunction always with safeguarding, and also times when, sadly, we've had to be the ones referring into MARAC. That isn't the ideal, but it's because other professionals are not acting. So I think we have, as an organisation, we have to call it out and say it like it is. And sometimes there isn't the professional's response that we'd always hope for. So with safeguarding, we've taken that decision, you know, to escalate because safety is paramount. I'm just seeing the chat. So I'll just, if we've got a quick minute, just look, there's a few things that have come in. I think Stevie had a situation with a couple who both of them do not display healthy behaviours towards each other. When the guy tried to call the police because of the way the female partner was verbally abusing him and throwing his items out of the property, the police did not take it seriously at all, acted like it was the guy. Yeah. Calling 999, but then the police aren't dealing with the aspects of coercive and verbally abusive behaviours, especially. Yeah, I mean, in those situations, Stevie, we have really looked to the specialist domestic abuse organisation for their skills on highlighting that to the police, because of their knowledge and evidence-based way of collecting that evidence. But it is a sad state of affairs. Primrose is saying the DASH is a good tool. Is it only accessible through SAP? I think the messaging, Virginia, you might know this more than I, but in my area, we have been told that we're absolutely not to touch DASH unless we've done the training. But actually any professional can use the DASH tool. It's online. It's just a load of questions, but I think the questions are quite specific. And if you had somebody who wasn't trained and wasn't a good caseworker, it could exacerbate a situation. I think the training just gives you confidence in how to phrase things and then actually what to do with that risk, because you're uncovering at times a huge unsafe situation. So the training, we found it was free. It was delivered through, you know, Women's Aid, one of the umbrellas, and it gave us actually quite a good resource to make sure that the assessments were being done by other professionals. So to see that our colleagues in the domestic abuse specialist services were doing the DASH, were doing the safety planning and referring to MARAC when they should have been. And although we weren't always involved in the doing, we were able to monitor and advocate a bit better.
Yeah, it's a lot of questions, and that, of course, if you've not been trained, you could interpret in different ways. So I think that's the reason why we, you know, at Red Cross, we don't encourage it, because we don't, you know, offer a specialized service on women in crisis. It's not everywhere and around the country, or have complex caseworkers. So because of that variety, it's something in the middle that doesn't, you know, it's not a fixed yes or no. But I mean, it could be useful. I mean, it's a really professional tool, and some of the questions do assess the risk in some of these indicators have been taken from that. But you know, you probably want to have training and be able to support a client and have responses as a result. So it would always be in conjunction with safeguarding at the moment, because of the way the Red Cross is structured. Right, so there's another question, or I think I mentioned at the start, victims of domestic abuse can go to any local authority for accommodation. Chose this week to go down domestic as asylum route. That's a family reunion case, Hannah. Have a duty to house her if she leaves. How does COVID affect? That's a really good question. I mean, we'll go into some of the legal, very briefly, legal aspects in the next activity, and you'll have to answer that. So if we just move on to the next thing. So what we were thinking here is, does anybody, like in the next 20 minutes, I think we've got a little time now. After disclosure, if we start from the example of the lady we had in the scenario, we know she's an asylum seeker. What do you think her leave options are according to the status? Because that's really key. We still have to advise that she should seek legal advice, but just in general, I think it's useful to know more or less what's the likelihood of getting emergency accommodation or immediate accommodation as a result. Does anybody want to start us off?
Yeah, I think if the abuse has maybe led, even if there's evidence of abuse, then she could probably go through, that could be used to go through the DV concession, and then maybe in the end she could have her indefinite leave to remain.
But if she's an asylum seeker though. So does everybody, so the Red Cross has been working a lot with ASAP on the domestic abuse guidance of the Home Office.
Yes.
Does anybody know about the?
So in case of asylum seeker, the NAS actually through Home Office and Migrant Help, and then there is a possibility, not possibility, a certainty of, rather I would say, that they will change the NAS accommodation, move to different places. Not necessarily refuse, because that's a bit of a challenging issue there. Then it was possible in some cases we saw in the past, very exceptional cases, but most likely NAS be the an alternative NAS accommodation is, and the safest place is the best protocol. And in terms of leave, yes, I think it's been answered. Thank you.
So it's really good news. In policy, one of the reading links that Virginia shared was this one, the Home Office domestic abuse response. And on page 10, it says clear as day. The first thing it says is that the presumption is that the victim should be believed at this stage and corroborating evidence is not required. So that's really crucial because we can't delay in these cases. And then it goes on really to detail how they should be moved to safe and secure accommodation, alternative NAS accommodation. And just before I finished speaking, the very next page, page 11, talks about the additional considerations for people who are an asylum seeker, but not in accommodation. So not actually taking up NAS and how they might get into support. So this document was published in July 2019. So I'd really, really recommend a good use of your protective time, reading all of it, but particularly page 10 and 11 and highlighting that, because when you're actually liaising with Migrant Help or the client is themselves, they can quote it and they should get exactly that swift response with no evidence required.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. I saw that somebody couldn't open the fact sheet, but it's on ASAP website. And yes, so it should be an immediate and safe alternative accommodation or a refuge. There should be the refuge space, although, the Red Cross is collecting evidence about the difficulties in implementing that. But also to highlight that even if she doesn't claim the asylum, make an asylum claim on her own right immediately, she should have the option of accessing alternative accommodation So any asylum seeker entitled to the usual section 495, 98, and have, in that way, the barrier of dependency seems to have been removed.
And just a practical tip, if I may, on the ASAP fact sheet, I'm so old school, I've got it printed out, but I do use it a lot, so I'm not harming the planet as much. But at the back is listed all of the safeguarding local Home Office contacts. So in terms of actually problem solving, this is a really good resource, because you're looking directly at the right, communicating and liaising with the right person for your area, their area. I hope that helps.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Carrie. Yeah, that's the go-to guide, actually, for asylum seekers wanting to leave their partner. Any idea, if you've got refugee status, what the housing option could be?
If there's children involved, can you do a Section 17 referral to the council, to social services?
If you've got refugee status, you've got access to full benefits, so they should be able to approach the local authority directly and be rehoused, or if they want to go into a refuge space, they should be able to access that and pay for it using their benefit entitlement if they're not working.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank
Okay,
you.
right. Yeah.
And it shouldn't be
Yeah.
a geographical limit where you apply, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Margin's right there, Hannah's right there, in that any local authority should respond. The refuge spaces should open up because there is recourse to public funds. The response that people actually get from a local authority may differ. And just to guide everybody to the reading material that Virginia shared, chapter 21 of the local authority's duty in responding is a really good, is a riveting read.
Can I help you?
Oh, Margin, you're on. Can you mute, Margin, or Virginia, can you mute? I think she's had to answer the helpline.
Let me find, 1 second, sorry.
How can I?
And Lily, just responding to your question quickly in the chat. Yeah, we have to help a person to access legal advice, but I would imagine that separating out from their
And also have
being
repercussions, yeah.
Yeah, so it is important to, if somebody's a dependent on an asylum claim, it's possible to separate that out. If somebody's here with no recourse to public funds under a spousal visa, that person should absolutely have legal advice, but there's a domestic violence concession, a sort of buffer status of 3 months, which is provided with benefits to allow for that safety to happen, and then an option to go on to apply for indefinite leave to remain following that concession. What about NRPF, the one where there are limited options? I think that's where I can't remember who mentioned it, but the suggestion around Section 17 really does play an important part. Does anyone want to expand on that? I can't remember who said it.
I think that was me. Yeah, if it's NRPF and there's children involved, you can make a referral for Section 17 support to the local council, and they should have a duty to protect the children regardless of recourse to public funds. Yeah,
well, and I think that throughout all of our areas, I know we do a lot of that work. If you're not familiar with Section 17 provision and you don't do so much of that NRPF work, Project 17 is a really good resource to look at rights and entitlements. But furthermore, Kira, I think West Sussex Local Authority, County Council is a good example of doing this, that the local authority under that Section 17 can actually pay and secure refuge space and pay the refuge space instead of, you know, just temporary accommodation under that Section 17 legislation. And that's really important to have in the back of your mind, because that might be the best place for that individual and children, because of the counselling and the holistic care that people get in refuges. And we can actually say, you know, a good example of in West Sussex County Council there is leading the field in actually doing that. Sometimes local authorities respond to that, you know, if they can hear that it's been done elsewhere, it's a good thing to have in mind.
Kerry, well, the eviction, removal of NRPF restrictions is, I think that is what I call the down quite.
Oh, Colm, you're breaking up.
Sorry.
Do you maybe want to put in the chat, or do you want to?
Oh, that's a shame. Yeah, we just couldn't hear you at all. I think while Colm puts it in the chat, just to acknowledge, Virginia and I really just wanted to acknowledge how difficult it is. It's the most difficult situation where a single person has no children, has an NRPF restriction. There are some really good local partnerships. There are some NRPF bed spaces. There are some hosting arrangements which can be found while the you know, the DDVC concession can be made. But it's really important to contact the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, because they can do a search on NRPF bed spaces. And also I wanted to draw attention to the ncdv.org.uk organisation, which can instigate emergency injunctions and occupancy orders. So I know that we're running out of time, but I really have done a lot of NRPF work now, and if it is an area you want to contact me on, I can share the tools that our team use about getting injunctions in place. But I'll share this link in the chat now, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Kerry.
Great, Kerry. Am I okay to hear now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah. Sorry. So, no, Kerry, thank you for offer. Just on the other side, like, you know, whilst sorting out Project 17, Section 17 rather, and then also the kind of the place for safety place. But at the same time, we have experienced now during the COVID time, like the people can actually apply themselves for NRPF restriction removal, and Home Office respond pretty quick, actually, in 3 to 4 weeks times. We have few cases so far. We've seen that, and that actually helped that whole family to access other supports when they became recourse to public fund, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Lifting the NRPF condition is possible. I would always caution that someone should get legal advice about any implications that lifting that NRPF condition might have on their leave. But 9 times out of 10, they get the green light from a legal advisor that it shouldn't have an impact. And as you say, the turnaround's quite quick on that. So that should be factored in, actually, for sure, that lifting that NRPF can then open up a whole host of other leave options for someone.
Kerry, yes, please, to the tools you mentioned, if you could send them around afterwards. I've picked up your information that you've put in the chat there as well. I think it's always, you know, it needs to be mentioned, doesn't it, that there is a core group of people for whom there is pretty much no help available at all. You know, if they're NRPF because they have no leave to remain, no one's going to help them if there's no children. And then there's, for those that do have leave to remain and it's NRPF, they're falling down a gap while they've got to get that NRPF condition lifted first, and that's not guaranteed. And although we're aware of that there are some NRPF beds available, pretty not very likely that you're going to get one.
Yeah, there's far too few, isn't there, sadly? But I would really recommend calling the National Domestic Abuse Helpline. Often you have to leave a message, but I found that they have really helped our team's capacity by ringing around, ringing and ringing. And sometimes we have been offered an NRPF bed space all the way, say, in Newcastle. They've assumed that somebody wouldn't want to travel there, wouldn't want it because it's just so far. But we have got in by using the national helpline. And I think in some areas we've got hosting schemes that have helped us to plug that gap. And I know that's not available everywhere, but I would just say to speak to your RSOM, whether we can provide emergency accommodation in any kind of stopgap. But yeah, there are few options. That's why I really recommend the NCDV referral, because that emergency injunction or occupancy order can actually make the perpetrator leave the accommodation, even if the person, the victim, has NRPF. So that's definitely one to explore. Maybe, Francis, maybe we could have a chat about it and then help disseminate sort of top tips through the teams with NRPF work, because I know it's particularly prevalent in our area, isn't it, in the southeast?
Yeah, it is, yeah. And I think we certainly need some high-level advocacy on this around the need to put the victim at the front here and their immigration status behind them, while people are working their way out of abusive situations, because we do have, and it happens far too often, unfortunately, and especially with women who are forced into even worse situations because when they've left an abuser, because they don't have any recourse to public funds and they can't get a refuge space anywhere. It's a very sad state of affairs, beyond our control, but high level advocacy might help.
Yeah, good points. I mean, yeah, we can talk, we can have a session just on this. And I think it's really important to have like an idea of what options at the back of your mind at every time you're dealing with this issue. Remembering that, you don't want to, influence too much the person. It's difficult. But it's just to highlight also the importance of getting legal advice to have a proper informed decision because of the risks of, maybe falling into worse situations, especially for NRPF clients. So we had another section of this activity, but we've really run out of time. So this is just to remind that, what if she doesn't leave eventually from taking and developing that scenario, or if she returns, given that if we think of the 6 stages of abuse, often survivors can change their mind, or like the immigration aspect also influences their decision. So did you want to say a few things, Carrie, or about good casework practice around?
I've just noticed in the chat Lily's point, and I think, yeah, it's definitely understood that those with insecure immigration status are very understandably very unlikely to call the police. And that's one of the indicators that makes particularly high risk work with individuals. But in the past, the police response is pretty poor, because I think they're overstretched in terms of responding to domestic abuse a lot, and there's also cultural considerations there at play. But I do know that anywhere where a woman or a man has mentioned abuse to any professional and it's documented, so say they were in A&E or their midwife has noted down something, that can be used in evidence by the immigration solicitor when trying to separate out the claims and deal with this legal status aspect. So they don't have to talk to the police. They can talk to any professionals that the solicitors then might pull evidence together on. But in terms of keeping safe and advising people to call 999 if they're in immediate risk, the police should be putting that individual first. They should be responding to the safety of that individual first and foremost, and then a time will come once the person is safe and secure that we can access legal advice, or they can access legal advice about their immigration status. But it is something that means that people suffer in silence, sadly. I think we can talk more about that, Lily, outside of this, but yeah, it's a really good point to make. And sorry, Virginia, you were asking about what makes a really good caseworker. All of the things, I think, you know, I go back to just being open, being genuine, in terms of being exceptionally professional, being concise and clear in your case notes, because we have had, sadly, some exceptionally tragic events unfolding, which require case reviews. And as a team, we've been able to do that because of the high quality of case notes that have been recorded, and the Datix entries, and the right kind of liaison with our safeguarding teams. So you're not alone. I think sharing that burden as well of these sorts of cases can help, because there is a limit that we can take as individuals. I certainly have that sense of dread every time, you know, I know that there are several DV, domestic abuse cases going on at once. Debriefing, making sure that we are referring. I mean, that's the most important thing, that our intervention is navigating consent, but sometimes referring without consent where necessary, but escalating. And, you know, when something doesn't feel right, it often isn't right. So getting advice and using our psychosocial support, who I don't think we've mentioned, have really fed into this manual. The psychosocial support that we all have for our own well-being, but also take these cases in when you have a session with your psychosocial support lead. You can bring in a whole bunch of difficult cases and talk through them, as well as with safeguarding, but they may give you phrases, ways of opening up, you know, conversations, difficult conversations. And in some cases, they'll even join you on a call with a service user. So that there are top tips.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carrie. Yes, so we've put like this slide with some tips for staying and safety, basic safety measures. Remembering that safety plan is also a specialist area that ideally you would be doing, would be referring to an organization to do, or maybe doing in conjunction when it's appropriate to keep holding to a case. But we've put some elements of that we think could be top tips on this slide, which I will leave you to read in your own time. We'll send you around the slides together with some handouts. And yeah, anything like any questions around this, or any other questions from the session?
And I just want to echo and support what Carrie just said about the use of psychosocial practitioners. I remember when I first used the DASH, they really helped me in understanding how to even answer, question, and maybe even probe more on questions that are there. So yeah, they're quite helpful, because I had them sit there with me in the session. I just explained to the client that they were there to support both of us. So she accepted their presence in the meeting.
Thanks for sharing, Primrose. Yes, very, very good point about the psychosocial support. I mean, this is the great thing about the Red Cross. Not many organizations that, you know, including domestic abuse specialists or lawyers doing very difficult work, don't have this sort of structure like the Red Cross has. So take advantage of that because it's really good. And also they really know the clients and the clients that we work with. So it's a really important resource together with the safeguarding team to help us be reflective about what we're doing and responding safely to situations that are complex. So I would end this session. I would keep talking to you about all these issues the whole morning, actually. Thank you so much for your sharing your ideas, expertise, and good casework tips. And have a good rest of the week from me.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, guys.
No worries. Have a lovely day if you can. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
You
guys.
too.